After Maduro's capture and his consequent forced removal from the Venezuelan government, many are asking what comes next and what the future holds for a country that is currently living under a dictatorship. The Trump administration did not stop at the capture. It is now outlining a detailed plan for the future of the South American country, divided into three phases: stabilization, recovery, and democratization. Today, we will address this topic with facts, analysis, and relevant information to help understand the broader context. First, a bit of history to set the context. Venezuela, once one of the most prosperous nations in Latin America thanks to its vast oil reserves, estimated at 303 billion barrels, the largest in the world according to the Energy Institute, plunged into a deep crisis starting in 2013 with the rise of Maduro following the death of Hugo Chavez. Under the Chavista regime, the country faced hyperinflation, shortages of food and medicine, political repression, and mass migration. According to UN data, by December 2025, around 7.9 million Venezuelans had fled the country, representing one of the largest refugee crises in recent history, surpassed only by Syria and Ukraine. This diaspora overwhelmed neighboring countries such as Colombia, Brazil, and Peru, with more than 6.9 million refugees spread across Latin America and the Caribbean. Oil production, the backbone of Venezuela's economy, collapsed from peaks of 3.5 million barrels per day in the 1970s to around 1.1 million barrels in 2025, according to OPEC and the U.S. Department of Energy. This decline resulted from a combination of mismanagement by the state oil company, widespread corruption, and international sanctions imposed by the United States since 2017. These sanctions, based on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, froze assets of Venezuela's state oil company in the U.S., banned transactions with the Maduro government, and targeted sectors such as gold and mining. The result? A GDP contraction of more than 80% between 2013 and 2020, followed by a slow recovery, 5.3% growth in 2024, yet still only half the size of the economy in 2013. Multidimensional poverty affects 73% of the population of 26.7 million, with 40% facing food insecurity, according to the World Food Program. Now let's get to the core, the U.S. operation. On January 3, 2026, U.S. Special Forces, supported by CIA intelligence and regional allies, launched a precise nighttime raid in Caracas. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were captured and taken to New York, where they faced charges of narco-terrorism and money laundering. Trump justified the operation as necessary to combat what he called a narco regime that, according to him, was flooding the United States with drugs and threatening regional security. But this did not come without controversy. International reactions were mixed. Allies such as Colombia and Brazil condemned Maduro but criticized the violation of national sovereignty. Adversaries like Russia, China, and Cuba labeled the operation an imperialist aggression, with Brazilian President Lula da Silva warning of a dangerous precedent that threatens regional peace. The UN, through the Secretary General, expressed concern over the legality of the action, citing violations of international law, including the prohibition of armed interventions without a Security Council mandate. In the days that followed, the Trump administration shifted its focus from the military action to what comes next. On January 7th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio went to Capitol Hill for a closed-door briefing with members of Congress. Later, during a press conference, he outlined the U.S. plan in three phases, emphasizing that the United States would temporarily assume control of Venezuelan oil to finance the transition. Rubio argued this was essential to prevent total collapse and to ensure that resources benefit the people, not corrupt actors. Critics, especially Democrats in Congress, called it oil theft at gunpoint and demanded transparency. Let's examine each phase in detail, drawing lessons from past U.S. interventions in Latin America, such as Panama, where the capture of Manuel Noriega led to initial instability, or post-2003 Iraq, where poor planning resulted in sectarian chaos. Phase 1. Stabilization, preventing chaos and controlling oil. The immediate priority, according to Rubio, is to prevent Venezuela from descending into absolute chaos. And chaos is no exaggeration. With the collapse of central authority, there is a risk of a power vacuum, leading to armed factional disputes, breakdown of security forces, a surge in organized crime, widespread looting, and state paralysis. To mitigate this, the U.S. imposed a quarantine on Venezuelan oil, using economic leverage to influence interim authorities. The first step, seize and sell up to 50 million barrels of oil already stored or in transit at market prices, not the discounted rates Maduro accepted to bypass sanctions. The U.S. Department of Energy estimates this will generate billions, with funds centralized in Washington-controlled accounts for transparent distribution. The justification? To benefit the Venezuelan people while preventing corruption. Rubio mentioned conversations with interim President Delcy Rodriguez, a figure associated with moderate Chavismo, signaling that the U.S. is engaging with remnants of the regime to ensure a smooth transition. But under what legal authority? With a polarized Congress, Democrats criticized the move. This looks like looting, said Senator Bernie Sanders. Republicans countered that controlling the oil prevents economic collapse and imposes discipline. Importantly, Rubio guaranteed there would be no cost to American taxpayers. Everything would be funded by Venezuelan oil. Historical lessons. During the 1989 invasion of Panama, the U.S. captured Noriega, but the initial vacuum led to looting and instability. Here, the focus on rapid stabilization, with coalition forces assisting in security, could prevent that outcome. In Iraq, ignoring critical infrastructure prolonged chaos. In Venezuela, prioritizing oil is strategic, but risky if it alienates locals. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis worsens. 7.9 million refugees by 2025, with 28% of the population requiring aid. Stabilization must include food and medicine distribution to rebuild trust. Phase 2, recovery, reopening the economy and attracting companies. With stabilization underway, the recovery phase begins, centered on reopening the economy and attracting companies, with oil at its core. Rubio describes this as an oil-funded process, but with a restructuring of the sector, removing control from Chavista hands and transferring it to the private sector. Concrete problems include low production capacity, aging infrastructure, the need for diluents for heavy crude, and disrupted export chains. The plan: ensure that American, Western, and other companies have fair access to the market. Translated, selectively lifting sanctions to allow investment. Chevron, which operates joint ventures in Venezuela, could expand. ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips, which left after the 2007 expropriations, could return with unresolved compensation claims. Rystad Energy estimates suggest 30 to 35 billion US dollars in investments over the next 2 to 3 years to raise production to 3 million barrels of oil per day by 2040. But challenges remain. Infrastructure alone requires an estimated 100 billion US dollars for full recovery. Past sanctions contributed significantly to the economic collapse. Recovery must include diversification, agriculture, tourism, and mining. China, which invested around 60 billion US dollars in Venezuela, now sees its access threatened. Russia, which also made major investments in the country, may retaliate. Phase 3, democratization, reconciliation, amnesty, and elections. This is the most delicate and political phase, rebuilding post-Chavismo society through national reconciliation, amnesty, and a democratic transition. Rubio emphasized the need for a representative government, the release of political prisoners, and the return of exiles. But amnesty can easily turn into impunity. Who gets amnesty? Maduro, his allies? In practice, free elections require internal security, transitional justice, and the dismantling of repressive institutions. Key figures include Delcy Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, and Vladimir Padrino Lopez. Washington acknowledges that the transition may depend on remaining Chavistas, creating a moral dilemma. Should negotiators deal with former oppressors? And if Delcy Rodriguez and her allies refuse to cooperate, will there be another intervention? Trump has already warned, if they don't do the right thing, they will pay dearly. The plan is ambitious but deeply uncertain. Remaining Chavistas still control the armed forces. If they resist, a prolonged conflict is possible. The U.S. plan is far from perfect, but it represents an attempt to turn the page in post-Maduro Venezuela. With billions in oil investments and a stated focus on democracy, there may be hope. But without genuine dialogue, the risk of a new cycle of violence remains. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and activate the notification bell for more in-depth analyses. Thank you for watching until the end, and I'll see you in the next video.